morning. That was an awful start. Hello, good morning. Welcome back into Morning Glory, my podcast. If you're new here, hi, I'm Brad. This is my podcast. No, we don't talk about boners. It's a play on words, okay? Because these episodes are usually filmed on a morning. All right? Slay. Today, though, we're not chatting shit. Well, we are chatting some shit, but we actually have a purpose for being here today, and that is because we are once again doing a deep dive into an album, as I enjoy doing. This time, we're doing Hit Me Hard and Soft by the one and only Billie Eilish. Now, this is obviously a new album that came out pretty recently. It's been out for about a week when I'm recording this, and to be honest, this has been a very fun one for me to go into, dissect, and just like figure out my thoughts on, because Billie Eilish is someone who I don't know much about past the music. Like, in general, I don't really delve into celebrities' personal lives because I don't really think there's a need for that. I know a lot of people do, but that's not really my thing. So in general, these kind of videos are always based on just kind of what I'm taking from the tracks. I try not to speculate in terms of people as much as possible, unless it's very blatantly obvious and the artist is making it more obvious in the song or whatever. So we will be touching on a few today, but overall, these are kind of just what I'm taking from the songs. And I know that that's kind of what Billie wants for people as well. Like, I've watched the Zane Lowe interview, I've heard what she said, and I completely agree. I will say, the one thing that does kind of bug me when I do these videos is when I get people being like, no, you're wrong, actually, it means this. Because unless, yes, obviously, like, some songs are blatantly obvious, but I think a lot of the time, the artists that I cover, especially in this little series we've got going, most of the times the lyrics can be kind of subject to whatever and whoever's experience, you know? And I think the beauty in music in general is to find your own meaning in it. And if that's not what the artist intended, then that's fair enough. But I still think there is merit to just saying what you think it could be about or the way you interpret it, you know? So as much as some of my theories might not be correct, I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. I just find this very fun. So yeah, and I am very much open to hearing your guys' theories. I won't be telling you guys you're wrong, so please don't tell me I'm wrong, but whatever. We're going to crack on in. We're going to obviously go track by track, as I do usually, and then at the end, I am going to rank the album. Now, I'll say this first and foremost, this was a very hard album to rank, because in general, I just don't think there's a song on the album that deserves to be at the bottom. Like, I think it's a very, very strong album. I don't know much about what people are thinking about this one because I've not really been on social media in the past week. So I don't know what the public perception of this album is. Obviously, I've seen that we get the general, Billie can't sing, she mumbles. That's always the case when it comes to Billie, and that just proves to me that people don't actually listen to the music, because there's no way someone is going to listen to this album and tell me that Billie Eilish can't sing. I'm just going to say that because, oh my God, the vocals on this album, from track to track to track, I feel like every track is different vocally, production-wise. It's so unique and an interesting piece of work, this, for sure. Definitely one of my favourites she's ever put out, I will say that. Obviously, I've not had it for that long, so who knows, it might not age as well as others, but for now, this one's definitely up there. But anyway, let's crack on in. Obviously, I've got my notebook here. Y'all know the drill if you've been here before. I write all my notes down in the notebook. So if you see me looking down, that's why. If you're listening, then never fucking mind. First track, Skinny. Now, this one, I feel like just from the title, I kind of knew what to expect coming into it. And that is obviously body image and kind of the societal standard that says, if you're skinnier, you're happier, or if you're losing weight, then you've got to be doing better, you know? Unless you get too skinny, and then it's the adverse. You know, we had this with Ariana Grande and, like, people saying that she'd now got too skinny. And then she came out and was like, well, actually, no, in actual fact, this is the happiest I've ever been, and I'm just making good choices for myself, and I'm being healthy. And, like, people's bodies just show it differently, right? I think in general, a consensus that I stand by is to not really speak about people's bodies as much as possible, unless, if you are going to, make it positive, okay? There's not often you'll catch me chatting shit about someone's body in a negative way. It's rare, okay? In general, this track is very much about that and kind of her reflecting on that, and then also kind of telling us how she feels about herself and like how she doesn't necessarily agree with what the public are saying, which I think is a nice thing to hear. I'd be more concerned if she was internalizing the public perception, because I think it's very hard not to, especially if you're in Billie Eilish's position, you know? But anyway, the first lyric that I thought was quite interesting, obviously, generally, lyrically, this whole album is impeccable, so it's all very interesting. But the first one I wanted to talk about is, am I acting my age now? Now, in terms of my interpretation, this could definitely be kind of reflecting on the previous era and how Billie was kind of doing the complete opposite to what she maybe did in the first era. Because the first era, I feel like, was more creepy, was dark. Aesthetically and like outfit wise, it was very much like Billie in baggy clothes, not wanting to show her figure because that's not what she does this for. Like, she's not doing this for people to perceive her in any sort of way, whether that's sexual or whatever, or yeah. So moving into Happier Than Ever, she kind of did the complete opposite and completely embraced her femininity in whatever capacity that was, and maybe acted a bit more mature or looked and appeared more mature. So I did think that maybe we could have been reflecting about Happier Than Ever in that whole era, which would make sense given that this is the first track into the new era. Obviously, she could just be saying this in relation to anything else, obviously, but that's just kind of where my mind went. She's already beginning to worry about her career. She says, am I already on my way out? Which also made me think about the previous era and how there was this whole debacle where people were saying, oh, it's a flop. It's a flop. The sophomore album flop, whatever that is, or is it slump? Maybe it's a slump. I'm not sure. But in general, I feel like this is a thing we hear constantly. Someone who I will relate this to is Olivia Rodrigo. I feel like she had the same thing with Guts. I don't think people necessarily said that Guts flopped, but I think in general, when you have a album like, for example, Sour or When We Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? These albums are moments in time, and they're something that I just don't think can, like, they're almost unattainable in a sense. And I just don't think, obviously in rare cases, I guess, but I just don't think when an album takes off to that sort of level, I just don't know how anything following that, specifically like in a second album, like directly following it, I just don't know how anything in terms of a project could ever reach that level again. I think part of what makes those albums so good is that this was like the first time people hear these artists and whatnot, you know? And like that's part of the excitement and part of why people want to stream the music, because they've discovered something new that they didn't know before. So obviously you don't have that in a second album, you know? So ultimately, like, I don't always expect a second album to surpass the album that made an artist who they are, you know? Because I just think that's a bit of a ridiculous thing to think about. So it's not surprising to me that Happier Than Ever maybe didn't do the same numbers that her first album did. But the numbers are still fucking there, you know? I don't think that necessarily means that it flopped. But I do know around that era there was that whole discussion. So I won't be surprised if these kind of things and the discussions kind of surrounding Happier Than Ever as a whole, whether that was kind of what made her start thinking more about this and like questioning herself in like more ways than one. She goes on to sing about feeling like a bird in a cage and a dog in a dog pound when she obviously steps off stage. This obviously, to me, correlates with fame and feeling trapped in fame, which is not a new concept. We hear about this constantly, which I think is totally understandable, because realistically, when you get to that kind of level, you can't really go anywhere. You can't really do anything without the public wanting to know about it and having a problem with it, usually. So that makes total sense. And those analogies make total sense to me. Dog in a dog pound, I will say, though, that's a new one I've not heard before. I think bird in a cage is kind of a more well-known one of these. Dog in a dog pound, however, interesting, new. And you said I was your secret and you didn't get to keep it. Now, I think at face value, this is very easy to relate to a relationship, you know, and someone being a little secret and them being mad when obviously like maybe the public find out or whatever, which it easily could be that. Alternatively, this could maybe not be about a relationship because up to this point, we've kind of been speaking about her career and herself and how she's kind of shot to fame and her dealing with it and whatever and how that affects her and stuff. So in my brain, it was like maybe this is talking about the fans because I feel like we see this quite often. I think I've mentioned it before in another episode, how when you've been a fan of someone from the beginning, like I'm pretty sure I've spoken about this in terms of Sabrina Carpenter, when you've been a fan of someone since the very beginning and then they kind of get discovered because same with Billie. I was here from the very beginning, like Ocean Eyes, 6 Feet Under, all of it. Bellyache, I was here. Copycat, I was here for them all. And there is a little part of you that's not resentful, but kind of like, for fuck's sake, as soon as that artist gets discovered, and obviously garners much more fans and a bigger fan base. So in my brain, that's kind of where I took that to be like, Billie Eilish was kind of like people's little secret and we didn't get to keep it because she obviously then went mainstream, which slay. And so mainstream she fucking did. But that's just my opinion. Obviously, this, like I said, this easily could be about a relationship, but alternatively, that's just where my mind goes. And overall, I think she's just kind of acknowledging that she's aware of the public perception of her and kind of reflecting on that and what it means to her and how she feels about herself, because obviously she says the old me is still me and maybe the real me, and I think she's pretty, which we'll come back to a little bit later, but what a fucking bar that is, right? Moving on, next track, Lunch. Now, I have drawn a little ham sandwich, okay? I think this one in general is a very self-explanatory one, okay? It's Boptown, USA. I will say, as I mentioned, I have watched the Zane Lowe interview with her and Phineas, and this section where they discuss Lunch is so fucking funny to me because Zane's over here trying to be like, well, of course it's metaphorical. Like, there's obviously the obvious, but there's also like a metaphorical sense to this one, isn't there, Billie? And she's just like, yeah, totally.
It's a metaphor for me. It's just about taking control, isn't it? About your life.
Right.
Like, she's just sat there like kind of side-eyeing the camera. Like, it's very funny. So if you've not checked out the interview, definitely check it out. In general, like I said, pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of about wanting to treat someone and kind of having the newness of someone there and the excitement of the possibility of someone. And I do think, given parts like Craving Not a Crush, I think we're more witnessing someone from an outside perspective and kind of just like fantasizing over things happening without anything having happened yet. I think it's very much like we're watching this person exist. Like she mentions in the second verse, she's taking pictures in the mirror. Oh my God, her skin's so clear. La, 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 la. I think we're friends with this person, which obviously makes sense given how the track kind of ends up. And I think we're kind of like witnessing this person. We fancy this person. We want to do all these things to this person. We're kind of fantasizing about how good life could be if only it was to happen. One part I do love is she says, if I'm allowed, I'll help you take them off. And I just wrote consent, baby. Consent is sexy, baby. She said, if I'm allowed, I'll help you take them off. So please allow me. Love. Oh, I love. I also really loved the part where she's like, she's the headlights, I'm the deer. I think that is just such an iconic line. And on top of that, the whole fucking tires screeching, like just after she says, I'm the deer. Phineas is at it again, guys. Phineas in general, and Billie, because I know that she also had a big hand in obviously creating this. Like, it wasn't just like Phineas on the production, Billie on the vocals, on the writing. Like, it was kind of like an amalgamation of the two, and they both just kind of worked together for this project. So I don't want to just give Phineas credit for the production choices, because I do know that Billie also had a hand in it. Production, all in all, absolutely stellar. And yeah, final thing I wrote down for this one, because like I said, there's not much to be said, it's just pretty surface level, is she told this person how she felt, and it actually never went anywhere, because she says, I don't want to break it, I just want it to bend. Do you know how to bend? You know? And it kind of just made me think about like the whole ruining the friendship kind of thing we hear about a lot. And like her kind of asking like, we don't have to ruin the friendship. Like we don't have to break it, but we could bend it a little. I'm sure it could give a little. We could blur the lines a little. I could munch on you a little bit. But yeah, overall, very fun track. Not surprising in the slightest that this is the one doing the most numbers. I think it's the most radio friendly. Well, maybe not lyrically, but the most local friendly, I'll say. It's the most palatable of all the tracks, I feel. Moving on, track 3, Chihiro. Now, I've wrote down a bunch of this one because if you didn't know, I love Spirited Away. I think it's an incredible movie. I will definitely be doing a video on this soon on the main channel. But for now, we're going to talk about the track, okay? Because clearly, Billie likes the movie too. And I do think in this situation, she is Chihiro and like she relates to Chihiro quite a lot. The person we're talking about, I do think resembles No Face, which if you've seen the movie, slay. If not, I'm going to go into what this means, okay? I'm going to give you a bit of a synopsis without trying to ruin it. I do suggest watching it though if you've not seen it. The reason why I'm saying I think this person kind of maybe resembles No Face isn't necessarily saying that they look like No Face, obviously, but I think in the way that they maybe treated Billie or the way they act and their personality, I think she kind of like sees that situation kind of emulated in her own life. I want to quickly hit on the plot and kind of like No Face's personality just for the people that haven't seen the movie, just so you can kind of understand the story that she's kind of creating here, which I think is incredible. I am going to read directly off of Ghibli Wiki, right? Because I found this when I was doing some research. I wanted to know exactly what they intended for No Face's personality. So it says, No Face is a lonely spirit who begins to follow Chihiro after having developed an interest in her sincerity. His vocabulary consisted of grunts and moans as opposed to coherent words. Not knowing much about the bathhouse or about other spirits in general, No Face learned by example and adapted to his surroundings. Exposed to the corruptive thoughts and greed of the workers, he quickly grew and encompasses their personalities. He literally eats them. Okay? He eats these people in the bathhouse. All right? Hoping that his endeavour to be like those around Chihiro would eventually garner her affection for him, while this ultimately brought upon the opposite effect. No Face becomes obsessed with Chihiro and wants to see her and her only. He becomes extremely volatile after being fed the river spirit's emetic dumpling. Don't know what that is, by Chihiro, and while fleeing from the obviously now hostile spirit, Chihiro calls out to him twice to follow her. She accepts him as a co-journeyer into the train ride on her way to the swamp bottom after he calms down and is out of the bathhouse. At this stage, No Face is no longer aggressive and is quite docile, even obeying Chihiro's orders like sit and behave yourself. After a monstrous, out-of-control being, No Face exhibits all the negative traits of those he had swallowed, becoming a brash, arrogant, loud and selfish creature whose obsession with Chihiro proved troubling for everyone around it. Now, the reason why I think that's important is because in general, I think relating to this to the story that Billie is obviously creating in the song, this is a slay. Because I kind of take this as meaning the person that we're talking about kind of like adapts to their surroundings and kind of emulates the people that they're around and kind of mirrors other people's personalities, which I don't think is a new thing. And I do think in general, there is people that just do this, and it is a way for people to kind of like either climb a social ladder or make friends. Like it's not always a negative thing, but I think in this instance, it kind of left maybe Billie not knowing either where she stood with this person, or she doesn't actually know the real them or their intentions or their personality. And then obviously moving into the track, she actually says, open up the door. Can you open up the door? Which bar. But in a literal sense, this could obviously just be referencing the movie because Chihiro is the one that lets No Face into the bathhouse out of kindness because she doesn't want him out in the rain. So she does allow him to come in. But subsequently, we could also take this in more of like a metaphorical way of her kind of asking this person to open themselves up to her, let her in, and like show her like their truth self, if that makes sense, and like kind of like drop the facade that clearly they use as like a coping mechanism to like I said, make friends or whatever or get by. In general, as it mentioned in obviously like the Ghibli wiki thing, No Face is generally like once he's consuming other people and like I said, maybe mirroring other people's personalities, he does become very greedy and gluttonous, but he always wants to impress Chihiro and is like often trying to like give her gifts. I think it's like little bits of gold or something, which like other workers in the bathhouse are like, yes, give me more, give me more. Like he's only emulating their greed back onto them. This is why I'm saying like kind of mirrors the vibes. Whereas Chihiro was never like, yes, give me it. Like she didn't want that from him. So it just makes me think like maybe this person is used to a certain kind of person and like tried to act the same way around Billie, but she's not like other girls, you know, like not to take it in that way. She didn't respond the way most people in this person's life responds. Does that make sense? This coming straight after lunch, and obviously in that track, her talking about wanting to obsess over someone and treat someone and this whole thing. I just feel like these two tracks kind of mirror each other, which I also think is really fucking cool because we're kind of talking about someone who, like I said, mirrors whoever is around, and like this whole thing, very slay, impeccable placement in my opinion. I do think, however, because there is like a change in production style and whatever towards the end, not at the very end, it's like 2/3 of the way through, and I do think maybe this is like a switch in perspective, because she says, that's when you found me, I was waiting in the garden, which, if you've seen the scene, if not, I'm sure I'm putting pictures on the screen, that's where Chihiro finds No Face in the garden. So I don't know whether she's kind of like talking from No Face's perspective now, or whether maybe she's become No Face and emulates those kind of traits to somebody else, or has done to another person. Just very interesting to me, that one. Like overall, that track is so fascinating, and I could probably talk about it much longer, but I'm not going to. We're going to move on to Birds of a Feather. Okay, definitely a lovely little pop number. Overall, I think Birds of a Feather is very much the idea of like not wanting to live without somebody, which I think is very obvious. There is a part of this track though where I did start to think, wait, are we maybe talking about our past self? Which I do think is a reach. I'll acknowledge that for sure. But I'm going to talk about it also. I'm going to give you both, okay? She sings, it might not be long, but I'll love you till the day that I die. Slay. But I also think this is maybe already Billie alluding to the fact that maybe she is also blue in this situation, which we know to be true when we get to the end of the album. But most of this track is spent telling us about this person being blue and sad and struggling and that whole thing. And Billie's kind of over here trying to show this person the beauty that she sees, you know, which very fascinating. The reason why I do think that there maybe is merit to this maybe being about her talking to her past self is because she's been pretty open about struggling quite a lot with mental health and depression and whatever else years ago. Obviously, it's a constant struggle. Those kind of things are, and I don't think it's one of those things that just goes away. So I imagine she still does struggle now. But the reason why I think it could be towards her past self is like her trying to say to her past self, like, no, look, you are beautiful. Like you're fine. Like you're doing great. Like, don't be so hard on yourself kind of thing, which, I'm sorry, taking it back to the very first fucking track where she says, old me is still me and maybe the real me and I think she's pretty, that would be very fitting, would it not? I think fucking so. But moving on, I'm going to kind of drop that theory because I think it's false. But I will just say, I wrote this in capital letters, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I think that's something that we all need to remember. Okay, now one person might find you butt fucking ugly, but another one, oh baby, you might be the cream of the crop, right? And I think in general, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that's something I really cling on to, best believe. As I mentioned, I do think in this track we're talking about somebody else, I don't know who, but somebody else struggling with not wanting to continue, right? She says, you want to quit, don't be stupid. I take that as like quitting life, which is whoa. And Billie sings, and if I'm turning blue, please don't save me. Nothing left to lose without my baby. Now, I wrote down she would allow this person to almost rub off on her if we're using blue as it is used at the very end of the album to kind of reference depression or mental struggles, whatever. Blue is often used in that kind of way. Okay, we've seen it many times with Taylor. So there is that. Like, I do think she's saying, like, she would allow this person to rub off on her, hence turning blue. Or, ultimately, in general, she'd happily let herself die, turning blue as in, like, passing away. And she don't want to be resuscitated. She don't want to be saved, because why would she want to be saved if she can't have her baby and, like, her baby's already gone? You know? She does say towards the end, though, can't change the weather. And I was like, well, I mean, the weather can change, but I guess we can't change the weather. And I was like, okay, the future for this relationship or whoever we're talking about here, the two people, right? The future is kind of forecast, which is, to be honest, that's an interesting one because I do struggle with this sometimes of like, are all these paths that we all take and all these choices that we make, are they all kind of foreseen and they were always gonna happen? You know, and do you know how people always say like people come into your life for either a season or whatever it is. What is it? A reason, a season, or something else, I think. There's like a saying there, I can't remember what it is. But yeah, it's just like this idea of everything was always gonna turn out this way. You know? So she does acknowledge that like realistically, we can't change the weather. We can't change realistically what's going to happen. But Billie would love to because she loves this person so much, right? In general, vocals. Towards the end, the vocal, specifically the one that she spoke about at length in the Zane Lowe interview, holy shit. The vocal that she was like, I'm just going to try and hit it. And if I hit it, I hit it. If I don't, I don't. Love. And she did, babes. She did. The production, like I said, is light and airy, kind of juxtaposing this pretty deep shit that we're talking about lyrically, right? And just in general, I like the vocal motif that repeats at the end. Like it's like a little humming thing. It just scratches. It just scratches a certain part of my brain, and I just live. Moving on to this one, right? This one is called Wildflower. Now, like I said, I don't want to speculate too much into people and specifics here. But I do think this is one of those tracks where I said an artist might make it a bit more clear. And I think this might be one of those, okay? Because realistically, once I was kind of doing my research and stuff into what some of these things could be about, it became pretty clear that the general consensus is that this is about Devon Lee Carlson. Okay? Now, if you didn't know, Devon Lee Carlson, she owns Wildflower cases, phone cases, right? Which would make sense. She also is the ex-girlfriend of Jesse Rutherford, who is Billie Eilish's ex. Okay? That's about as much drama and speculation we're going to get. Okay? Moving on into the track. She's very much singing about a current partner's ex. Okay? Devon. Billie was there for this girl when the relationship between them, before Billie and this person, she was there for this person when their relationship broke down. Okay? She sings, she was crying on my shoulder, all I could do was hold her. Okay? We were there for this girlie, as we should be, right? Then we move on a little bit. Turns out they were close, maybe? Now, this is just my speculation here. They were close until Billie ultimately started dating the ex, Jesse. Okay? Right? And in general, I think this song is very much Billie struggling to let go of like the guilt and the betrayal that she feels towards this girl, right? And we're constantly thinking about this girl and like what they think of Billie and what she's done, right? She sings, like a fever, like I'm burning alive. This person haunts Billie, and it's kind of happening beyond Billie's control. Like she's just always there, because realistically, we can't control a fever. Obviously, we can take medication or whatever to get over it, but it's a process. A fever comes whether we like it or not, you know? Lovely lyric there. I do love the thought of like describing these thoughts and feelings, thinking about this girl and what we've done to her as kind of like a fever, and like how a fever affects us too. And a fever can like really stop us in our tracks. Billie obviously does sing "Did I Cross the Line" quite a few times throughout the track, right? And all I've wrote for this is girl code, and I've underlined it and full stopped it. Right, I think that's where it is. That's where it lies. Right, she sings, and I know that you love me. You don't need to remind me. And I think she's saying, this isn't about you. This is not about the love and whether there's love there or not. That's an obvious, that's a given, right? That's not the thing I've got a problem with. That's not what I'm struggling with here. Right, that's never been a part of this. It's in fact Billie just feeling unsettled by her own actions and questioning whether she can continue with current relationship with the way that it's affecting her, and like how the past is affecting her, because the past is essentially affecting the present, right? Makes sense. Every time you touch me, I just wonder how she felt. Now, I have put that in capital letters because what the actual fuck are we talking about here? That is an insane line to write on paper. Every time you touch me, I just wonder how she felt. Like, I hope to never be this obsessed with exes. I feel like we've had it a bunch of times recently, I feel like we had themes of this in Taylor's album. I feel like we had it in Ariana's album. And like Olivia's been singing about being obsessed with her ex. Like, oh my God. Guys, we need to get ourselves together. I then went on to say what happened on Valentine's Day, because in the song she mentions on Valentine's Day crying in the hotel. Now in my brain, that's when her and the current relationship broke off. She kind of ends the track by saying, "Do you see her in the back of your mind, in my eyes?" And it's like, and I feel like this is Billie kind of wondering if the guilt that she felt towards the previous girl, whether that ultimately was the thing that made her current boyfriend or whoever we were with break it off with us, because they could tell that we were struggling with it and like not being able to get over the way this kind of like began, kind of thing, right? And I think in general, there's two ways kind of like that last line could go. And it's either, does Billie remind him of her? Like, does he, when he looks at Billie, does he see her? Which, that's more of a face value thing. Or alternatively, could it mean like, does he look at Billie and in her eyes see that Billie's thinking about her? Right? I don't know. That's a very, the way that she wrote that line, so complex. Like, it's, do you see her in the back of your mind, ? Right? Which I think is important. And then the next line is, in my eyes, ? So it's actually two questions. I don't know. It's just interesting, guys. It's just fucking interesting. Lyrically, that one's insane. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not my favorite in terms of like the production or whatever. It's a pretty simple one production wise. But lyrically, it's like an insane track. Abso-fucking-lutely. Next one, The Greatest, right? We're really in the depths here, people. The Greatest. I've wrote at the very top of this one, vocals. Overall, insane. Insanity. These vocals, right? We're putting someone else's needs and feelings above our own, which we should never do, okay? I understand in a relationship it can get a bit troublesome, but in my opinion, You should never be that deep in a relationship to the point where you don't give a fuck how you're feeling. You just want to make that other person feel good. No, no, no. We both want to feel good, don't we? Yes, we do. Okay? She's kind of saying that she's there when they need her. She kind of allows these people or this person to take advantage, right? And like, she's just there to please. And she waits and she waits and she waits. Now, first line. And I do think this first section of the song is before they got together. I'll say that. I think there's a timeline to this track. Now she sings All My Admiration. This is part of the first part, right? Now, once again, I don't like to speculate, but the thing that came to mind for me was the whole Jesse Rutherford thing. And there's reasons why. And somehow it does relate to Elvis and Priscilla, but we'll go on to talk about that in a sec. Because when I did some research into a bit more of like Billie's recent relationship or whatever, because I didn't know anything. This is the thing. I knew that she was with Jesse Rutherford, and I knew that he was a bit older than her. I didn't know the ins and outs, didn't know the details, nothing. So I did think, for me to be informed somewhat for this podcast episode, I felt like I needed to know a little bit more, right? So, generally what I gathered from this whole Jesse Rutherford situation is that Billie had said that when they first met, she was actually 15, right? And she thought he was like the hottest fucking fucker alive. And that's verbatim, right? That's taken from a fucking interview. Okay? She also goes on to say, round of applause for me for pulling his ass. Right? Which is also from an interview, which I'm sure you've all heard. The word admiration, I feel like that's more of like I'm looking up at someone. I'm looking to someone in admiration. Like, it's not saying like all my love or whatever. Like, that's a bit more surface level. I feel like admiration is, I don't know, just looking up more to someone and just being like admiring them as a person, not just as like being sexy or whatever, that kind of thing, you know? She moves on and she says, doing what's right, that whole thing. And I think we've now transitioned to the end of the relationship. So I felt the first part was maybe the beginning, her trying to get in this relationship and kind of how she acted at the beginning when she was trying to pursue this person. Now I think we've transitioned to the end, and she's saying we don't have to fight when it's not worth fighting for. And she's essentially accepting it's not right and like kicking herself for the way she acted in the beginning now. Like, hindsight is a beautiful thing, you know? There's a part here, and this is what made me think of Elvis and Priscilla. Okay, because she sings, for you to want me naked. So she's talking about her waiting for him to want her naked, waiting for him to basically treat her the same way that she'd been treating him, whether that be in the relationship or even before that when she was obviously admiring him, pining after him, this kind of thing, right? The reason why it made me think of Elvis is because recently I've watched Priscilla, okay? Very fascinating story, and I feel like the emphasis in Priscilla was on how long she just waited around and like the time she spent waiting for Elvis to come back and show her affection and show her some attention. And like when he did come back and when he did do that, she'd soak it up, you know? And she allowed herself to kind of just be this thing here that's waiting constantly, like this object that's just here for Elvis whenever he needs her. You know, and I don't know. I just saw this. I saw that in this song, and like how like she was waiting for the time for him to want to be affectionate with her, because the whole part of Priscilla is like her wanting to be intimate, but we can assume the age thing was kind of what made Elvis wait and wait and wait. Right? And I wouldn't be surprised, now this is also me just speculating here, I won't be surprised if within this relationship with Jesse, there was maybe hints of that. But don't get me wrong, obviously, Billie was older than Priscilla when they were getting together and whatnot, but obviously when they first met, she was 15. You know? I don't know, it's just interesting. I'm not saying that's exactly the case, but I think it's interesting nonetheless, okay? The outro for this song is absolutely buck wild. Okay, it's insane. She sings, I loved you and still do. I just wanted passion from you. Just wanted what I gave you. I waited and waited. First of all, the vocals on that part, holy fucking shit. The pain. You can hear the pain in that part, in how she sang it. And she also mentioned in the Zane Lowe interview that she was really happy with how she sang that. And you know what? Kudos, Queen. Give yourself those flowers, right? And I just think in general, the whole like, she just wanted what she gave him. She was waiting for him to admire her because she'd been admiring him for so fucking long. Oh, I love this song. Your heart is jaded. You couldn't even break it, which, oh my God, this line, guys, it's insane. But I did want to know exactly what jaded meant, because obviously we had that Miley song about being jaded, and I never really understood what jaded meant in terms of people. And I Googled it, and it said when something is like overworked, fatigued, right? So he's saying to her that his heart is so tired, he couldn't even allow it to break when they ultimately broke it off. Like, their breakup didn't even break his heart because he was like, oh, my heart's jaded. Fuck off. You just didn't care enough about her. Like, that is so sad to think about. Like, imagine getting out of a relationship and, like, the breakup not affecting someone. Like, I think in general, even, especially if it's like a mutual kind of breakup where someone hasn't, like, cheated or whatever, right? Like, to have one person in that relationship just not really care that much, like, not really show any interest. Oh, it pains me. It pains me. Anyway, moving on to L'amour de ma vie. Now, this is essentially the complete opposite in some regards, or I think it maybe is meant to appear like it's the complete opposite, but I have thoughts. I think in general, the placement of these two tracks being back to back, buck wild. She's insane for that. Insane for that. It's very much her clearing her conscience about lying to someone, allowing them to believe that you're each other's love of your life. But now in my brain, I was like, are we actually saying that we always lied to this person? Or are we now out of said relationship and we're kind of backtracking on things to make ourselves feel better? Or did in the moment we think, oh, I'm in love with this person, when in actual fact, Taylor's oldest time, it was actually just like infatuation or lust. All things could be possible, and I find very interesting. Okay, like, are we now realizing that it wasn't love, but we thought it was when it was happening, right? Like, I don't think we're saying that I told you I was in love with you when we were together, but in actual fact, I lied to you the whole time. I think this is more of like a realization that she's having now, after the fact. And it almost might be making herself feel better, but we'll go into it. If we are going to take it at much more of a face value kind of vibe, this could just be saying that whoever we're singing about was much more into this than Billie was. Fair enough. There's a part of the song where she sings, you said you'd never fall in love again because of me, then you moved on immediately. Bum, bum, bum. And I've just wrote, rebound, honey. Get under someone to get over them. Absolutely, that's what it is. That's what we get told all the time. Now, I don't subscribe to this kind of narrative, right? I don't think that's healthy in any way. But does it take your mind off things? Or does a rebound sometimes work momentarily? Yes, it fucking does. Okay. And I have wrote halfway through here, I was like, this is a very sexy and swanky production. Now, I know swanky kind of means fancy, but in this way, like, think of the way swanky sounds. That's how this song sounds to me. Like, it's swanky and twangy and, like, sexy. I like this one a lot. Now, here's where I got into maybe an alternative narrative for this one, right? And how I kind of take it. I've wrote down bitterness. Are we lying in this track to convince ourselves? Or is it, like I said, just the obvious? Right? She sings, so you found her, now go fall in love. Just like we were, if I ever was. There's a part of me that thinks this part just gives kind of teenage petulance energy. Like we're bitter and we're angry because we've been pained by something. We've seen that this person now... This in the last track, I don't think... I think she said that they're not even the same situation. I'm unsure. So I don't want to tie these together if they're not, but in my brain, this just makes the most sense. All right? I feel like we've been pained by something, right? We've seen that this person just generally hasn't given a fuck, and now we're backtracking, being like, oh, you know what? Actually, I fucking lied to you. We're trying to get one up on them, right? We're trying to be like, you know what? I'm actually not as hurt as you think I am. But I think that's bullshit. I think we're bluffing here. That's what I think this track is. And I just think we're trying to not admit to ourselves as much as it is the other person. I also don't think we want to admit to ourselves how bad it actually did hurt you, because we're trying to keep up this appearance of being unbothered, right? She sings, because for you, I was the love of your life, but you were not mine. She made herself be that for him, but he couldn't do the same in reverse, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because the way she wrote it, because for you, I was the love of your life for you. Like, I allowed myself to be that for you, and I was prepared to be the love of your life, but you were not prepared to be that for me. So ultimately, you broke it off. You stopped it from happening. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because I think that's fucking slay. And I wrote down, rather than saying she didn't feel like he was the love of her life, he didn't actually allow it to happen. And then obviously the ending, Over Now, which is obviously a different song. And I think she said it's about someone completely different. In general, just fucking whoa, right? We've got an 80s production at the end here. Very fucking fun. And I feel like it very much gives the kind of like the unbothered energy that we were trying to convey this whole time. So it just makes sense for that to be the end of this one. And in general, with the outro, we were kind of just mocking someone, trying to belittle them, and we're essentially just buzzing that it's over. And lastly, their new girl is a fan of Billie. Fucking slay. Love that for Billie. That must feel so fucking good. Imagine that. Finding out that someone's new girl is actually a fan of yours. Oh, I think I'd love. Anyway, next we've got The Diner. And I have drawn, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this once again, I have drawn a little stalker figurine, okay? Because this song is stalky. This one gives me very much my Strange Addiction vibes, right? Cast your minds back to that track. It gives me that. And I love my Strange Addiction. And in general, I love when Billie does creepy, but like creepy in like a funky way, right? Obviously, I love the creepiness that we had in the first album, obviously. Oh, also, guys, let me know. Would you like me to go back through her albums and maybe do deep dives into those albums? Because I'd love that. Let me know. Now, once again, during my research, I did find out that Billie actually did have a real life stalker. So I think this track is basically her speaking from the stalker's perspective to Billie. Bet I could change your life. You could be my wife. Could get into a fight. I'll say you're right and you'll kiss me goodnight. And I think, now maybe this is untrue, but how cool would it be to think that this is like an interaction that they had, or a conversation that they had, or whether this was a letter that was wrote to Billie, which is something that is mentioned later on. Maybe this was like taken from a letter that she received from a stalker, and it said like things in it like this. Like, I think that would be so fascinating if we found out that some of these lyrics were kind of inspired by a real life event, or like I said, like a letter or something. Obviously, not the unsafe parts. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I just think lyrically it could be quite fascinating. I wrote down, did the stalker get put away? Because there is the whole talk about, I think it's in the second verse maybe, the whole talk about prison and bail and this kind of thing. So it makes me think, did the real life stalker get put away, or are we kind of going a bit more fictional now, kind of like beefing the story out a little bit? The end is obviously talking about this person knowing her number, and now that they've got a number, they'll just call her whenever they please. And I think obviously like the number that's repeated at the end, I feel like that's meant to be like her doxing herself, when if you actually call it, which I haven't called it, but other people have. If you call it, it's essentially like Billie answers, but I guess it's just like an automated thing, and she essentially just says like, "Oh, I'll call you back." which I think is fucking iconic. This one, like, is probably the most fictional story-based one. Whether it's fictional or non-fictional, like, who knows? Like, maybe some of this, like I said, is based on, like, real life and some things that have happened to her. I just think this one is so fun. Like, through the production, through the lyrics, through the vocal choices, like the way she sings some of the parts. It's just creepy and I like it. Yeah, I love the diner, and I think it's been slept on, which is quite sad. But anyway, moving on. Bittersweet. This is another one that's fucking fascinating to me. I think I've said that about every single track, to be honest, and that's because all of these tracks have, I think, different ways that they can be interpreted, that I just think makes experiencing an album like this more juicy and more fun. So this is another one of those that, like, I think there's like a kind of like a timeline here that I'll talk about. At the very beginning, we're dreaming about someone, and the way like Billie's being able to see the way they want her in that moment, and she wants that and wants to allow that to happen and wants it to be a reality, but she doesn't feel like she can make it a reality, right? I think overall, very self-discovery, this one. I think this one's talking about her maybe having her first experience with a woman. Who knows? I could be wrong. Because, like, she mentions, I want to be the one, but I got to be careful. And, like, this idea of, like, having to sneak around and, like, experience things without people finding out, right? Which would make sense. She also sings, God, I hope it all goes away. Can't fall in love no matter how bad I... blah, blah, blah. What, that whole part, right? And I feel like it's this idea and this feeling of knowing in your head and in your heart and internally that you want something, in brackets I did write maybe the same sex, but hoping that it's a phase. You know, I feel like a lot of us will relate to this idea that when you're first coming to terms with your sexuality, there is that whole moment where, I mean, maybe not for some people, but I certainly felt this, where it's like, I'm acknowledging that I'm having these feelings and these thoughts, but I'm hoping that this is not a reality. And I'm going to wait this out and I'm going to see if this is a reality or not. Or whether this just goes away. Because who knows, maybe this is just like a momentary thing. Like, I vividly remember having these thoughts of like, fuck, this is actually going to be a thing that I'm going to have to acknowledge at some point. So there's that. And then I feel like we then transition, because there's a switch up once again in the production, which a lot of these songs do have a bunch of like switch ups and transitions and whatnot, but there's a specific one in this track where I feel like we're maybe transitioning into accepting it, or if we're going to go a bit more deep here, maybe delve a bit deeper, are we like delving into the dream? Like, are we now putting ourselves in the dream? So like, this thing hasn't happened yet, but we're experiencing it in the dream, right? And I do feel like the production around this kind of time does give kind of like trippy, dreamlike energy. So I just think that's really fun to think about. Now, when you listen to it again, guys, try and think about this kind of timeline, and I think you might see what I mean. And she obviously then switches up some of the lyrics, and she says, keep it brief, I'll wait in the suite. So before, it was kind of like her denying this and like not like wanting it to happen, but ultimately shutting it down and being like, I don't think I'll be able to let it happen, whatever, I can't let it happen, right? Now she's kind of being like, I can keep it brief. She's opening herself up a little bit, and she's like, I'll keep it brief, I'll wait in the suite, we'll make this quick, right? And it'll be like it never happened, right? Then she obviously speaks about filling the void and like looking at the boys and this whole thing. And I kind of take that in the way of like, she hasn't allowed herself to fill the void, i.e. explore girls, out of spite, because she ultimately doesn't want to prove people right. And I think this is a big thing that we actually need to talk about, because the amount of people I have seen since this album has come out, so in the past week, the amount of people that I've seen be like, oh, we knew. Oh, I knew. This is not a surprise. I knew. Do you understand how fucking stupid that is? Shut the fuck up. That is one of the most annoying things anyone can say, in my opinion. If someone comes out to you, the worst thing you can say to that person is, oh, I knew. No, you fucking didn't. You didn't know until I knew, bitch. I'm the one that needs to know these things first, right? You didn't know nothing. Oh, anyway, don't get me started. Obviously, if you're the person in this situation, so like say I am Billie in this situation, when I came out, yes, I'd been asked before, are you gay? And like my family had alluded to this, and I knew that they had this thought of me. But ultimately, until I decide to actually come to terms with it myself, none of you know shit until I confirm it. You know? Fuck off. I just think it's such a wanky thing to say. Oh, I knew. I knew she was a lesbian. It's not surprising to me. I knew. Ugh. And I think that is a valid response to not want to allow yourself to give in to these like thoughts and feelings, because I'm sure there's been people that have been like, oh, surely she's a bit gay, or surely she's a bit fruity, whatever. And like, I'm sure there was part of her being like, well, I don't even want to fucking try it out, even though I want to, just because if it ends up being correct, then I know what all these people are going to say. They're going to be proven right, and I don't want to prove them right, you know? So in my brain, that's why I went with that one. And I just wrote fuck off in big letters. She then moves on to say, in the last part of the song, she sings, I'll see you in the suite, we can be discreet. Oh, babes, it's happening now. Right? We're out of the dream, I feel like, and I think we're actually happening. It's actually happening, and I once again, it's so interesting to see how we've changed the lyrics each time, and now she's like, oh yeah, I'll see you in the suite, we can be discreet. Like, it's almost like this isn't the first time anymore. Like we've been doing it. This is like a thing that we've been doing now. We're used to it a bit more. I think it's fucking slay. There's also callbacks to L'amour de ma vie and Chihiro in this song. Right at the very end, the production gets very intense, and I feel like this is her. Like, if it hasn't happened before, I think this is her accepting it, and we're going through it, and like the emotions are getting intense and whatever. Like, it's the climax, people. It's the climax, I feel. She sings, I know it seems to be the beginning. Listen up. I want you to keep doing it. It's something I don't know. I've never paid this much attention to you ever. And in my brain, I wrote her desires. I think she's at that last line. I've never paid this much attention to you ever. I think because there's obviously that level of like suppressing. You suppress yourself when you're just like trying to discover yourself, like because you don't want it to be true. And I think she's almost saying like, I've suppressed my desires this whole time, and I've never listened to myself and what I actually want this much before. And now I'm allowing it to happen. I just want it to continue now. You know? Oh, I love this track. And then obviously at the very end, it ends with kind of like the tune and like the melody of Blue somewhat, as it obviously then transitions into the next track, which is Blue, the final fucking track. Okay? Now, this track I know is a mix between two tracks that Billie had started, which were Born Blue and True Blue. I'm not sure if they were both leaks or if just one of them was leaked, but I'm pretty sure one of them or both of them were leaked. And yeah, these are basically an amalgamation of the two tracks, and she's kind of brought them together, and it just makes sense for her now. Because alone, like the two tracks just didn't really make sense, right? That's what I got from the Zane Lowe interview. I believe we start off with True Blue, and then we do transition into Born Blue towards the end. At the very beginning, we start with the chorus, which is, I try to live in black and white, but I'm so blue. And I think this is another one of those things where obviously there's the face value thing of blue being depression and sad and that whole thing. Very valid. Totally has merit here. But I also think past that, if we're going to go a little bit more generic and a bit more broad, I think that could easily be her just saying, especially after the last track, being bittersweet and acknowledging that whole thing. I think this could just be her being like, look, I've tried to be one or the other. I've tried to be what society says we should be, black or white. Like, I've tried to be that, but in actual fact, I'm something completely fucking different. I'm out of the societal norms. I'm accepting myself for being something different than what is normal in a lot of people's eyes, right? Which I love. Right? Obviously, blue, as I've said, can definitely mean just her being sad and kind of her just talking about her depression and that whole thing. Totally. But I think that is also something that I think we need to think about here. And I definitely think that that definitely has merit in this track. She also, as she did in Good Night on her very first album, she references all the tracks on the album up to now on this track, which I love when she does this shit. Because I just, once again, I've mentioned this before, whenever there's like callbacks to a previous track or like even if it's just like one line, I just think it shows like intention and it shows thought and care and meaning. It just shows that like the artist really cares about this being streamlined and like we're creating a story. Love. So I have wrote them all down because I got my investigative brain on and I went through every track again and saw what parts of this track could be linked to what track. So we're going to go through and I'm pretty sure it's in the first verse. So she obviously sings Birds of a Feather. Obviously referencing Birds of a Feather. I Told You a Lie. Des Sol Mon Amour. I'm not sure whether I'm saying that correct, but I'm pretty sure Des Sol Mon Amour means I'm sorry, my love. And that's obviously a reference to L'amour de ma vie. She sings I'm Trying My Best. I think that's obviously a reference to The Greatest. Don't Know What's in Store. Chihiro, because she also then says open up the door. Obviously Chihiro. In the Back of My Mind. Wildflower. Now that one was a really short and subliminal one, and I was like, in the back of my mind, I swear she's mentioned that before. Like thinking about this girl in the back of her mind, right? Wildflower. I'm Still Overseas. Bittersweet. A Bird in a Cage. Skinny. Thought You Were Made for Me. Lunch. And then she doesn't really talk about the diner as such. Like, there's things that you could probably like reference the diner in, but nothing so direct until the chorus where she sings I'm Not What You Need. And I'm pretty sure at the very beginning of the diner she says I'm What You Need. So it's a direct like comparison, like a flip, you know? We then obviously transition into Born Blue. This track as a whole, because I don't know much about Billie and her personal life or whatever, this one was a bit of a difficult one to really delve into that deep, like past the face value of it all. So I've got a bunch of like things here that could potentially work, but I don't really know. There's obviously like the literal aspect of being born blue from birth, like deprived of oxygen and that whole thing. Like my little sister had the fucking umbilical cord wrapped around her neck and she came out blue, right? But I feel like she's almost relating that, whether that happened to her or someone in her family, like maybe her parent or her brother. Like, I don't know who we're talking about. I feel like one of the people has to be her, but I think she's almost relating this to many people, I think. And I think she's kind of like relating the idea of being born blue from birth, like literally, like deprived of oxygen, and how that can almost forecast, right? Or predict maybe how someone grows up, and like maybe that can affect someone moving forward. I also, once again, did write down that this easily could just be her talking about her younger self. Who knows? I also wrote down that depression can be genetic. So I do think past this just being maybe about her and whoever else, this could be about people in her family or like a parent or something. I did think maybe a mum, but I don't really know much about her mum in terms of that, so I don't want to speculate too much. But I just wrote, overall, whoever the two are or the people are, they're relating over being blue, be that by a circumstance or by being like in the public eye and having to deal with the pressures of that. And that like creates the blue, you know, like realistically, depression and whatnot can be genetic, and you can be born with it, or it can be affected by like your surroundings, right? And that's kind of it. That's kind of all I said. Like, I don't really know with that one. I don't feel the need to speculate too much because, like I said, I think this could be just a broad discussion on just like mental health and whatever else. So with that said, guys, that's going to bring us to the end of my track by track analysis. Now, like I said, let me know down below if you have any ideas or things that you've picked up on that I didn't pick up on. I am here to learn and hear your thoughts, okay? But last thing I want to do before we go is my ranking. Now, like I said, there is not one track that deserves to be at the bottom of this album. There's not. There's not one track that deserves to be at the bottom of the ranking. It's not a thing with this album, in my opinion. Like, I could have done so many ties and like three-way ties, but I think that's just a cheating system for me. So I'm gonna give you it. And just know, even whatever's at 10 is still a phenomenal track. There's no bad track on this album, okay? But it's just like from great to like my favorites, you know? And most of it just comes down to like the vibes, the production, that kind of thing. Lyrically, they're all insane. So we've got at 10, Skinny. Mainly because it's a bit more on the mellow side. You'll see, I think, throughout this, that I generally gravitate more towards like the bops, the more tracks, that kind of thing. So we've got 10, Skinny, 9, Bittersweet, 8, Blue, 7, Wildflower, 6, Birds of a Feather, 5, L'amour de ma vie. And to be fair, from 5, I was fucking struggling. 4, The Greatest, the vocals in that song, holy fucking shit. 3, The Diner. I find that song extremely fun. I love that song. Like, realistically, top 3 could have kind of gone any way. 2, Chihiro. Number 1, Lunch. But like I said, I've literally wrote like a little arrow that like they constantly flip between my favorites, like Lunch and Chihiro. Like, who's to pick? You know? But in general, like I said, guys, there's not one bad song. I don't know, obviously, in a year's time, if I'll be as obsessed as I am right now. Only time will tell. But it's a very strong piece of work regardless. Oh, and I don't know if you noticed, but I am wearing my Billie Eilish t-shirt, my Hit Me Hard and Soft t-shirt, and I have got my vinyl. It has arrived. But yeah, I'm going to leave this here. This one's been a little bit of a shorter one, thank God. Love yous lots. See you soon. Comment down below or let me know on social media or whatever any other albums that you want me to deep dive into. I'm thinking of maybe doing Snow Angel by Renee Rapp. I think that would be a fun one. Maybe Chapel Rowan. I might do a deep dive into her album. Obviously, there's Guts, there's Preacher's Daughter. There's a bunch that I want to do, but it's just getting around to doing them, isn't it? But yeah. Love yous lots. See you soon. Goodbye.